Welcome, folks, to the No Picks After Dark podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Dante. Today, you know how we do. We always bring the heat. It's the October Surprise Part 2. I'm so excited to have this special guest with me. I had her on my show when the pandemic was just starting. And I remember we had no idea what the hell was going to happen. All we knew was, hey, let's just talk. We did elbow high five. And I was in a different studio at that time. So without further ado, Miss Stephanie Bamberger, how are you doing today?
I'm great.
She is
I'm hanging in.
the world-renowned real estate. You know, she knows everything. She is plugged in the scene, folks. Plugged in.
Yeah, I didn't pay you to say that.
Nah. You're legit. You were legit. So how have you been since the last time we've talked?
It's been crazy, hasn't it? I forgot that the last time that we talked, it was just shutting down, and we were talking about a potential stall maybe in the real estate market because things were starting to slow down because everyone was panicking.
I remember you were saying to me, you said, Aaron, people are doing virtual housing shopping. That was in the beginning, because we didn't really know. Did we really know at that point?
No, but nobody wanted to leave their houses, or that was the fear. And so there was a lot at the beginning of that talking about shopping from your home on your computer for homes, and was that going to work? There were a lot of agents that kind of said that's kind of where we're going to go. We're going to start posting videos. We're going to start doing 3D tours, and we're going to hope that maybe people convert to doing online shopping like you do for a pair of tennis shoes.
I totally remember that. And I remember we were talking about it, and we just didn't know what was going to happen.
Right.
And
yeah, who knew, right?
That was in, what, it's 2000. Oh, so we did an interview, probably want to say in March of 2000.
It was.
March of 2020.
Yeah.
And I really wanted you to come back on because the world has changed since then.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we're going to get into all the wild stories because you told me some crazy ones. And I wanted to bring you back on because I just wanted it to take us on the timeline of what went down from March until where we are right now of October of 2021.
Sure.
So let's go with the housing market in the beginning of the pandemic, March, April, May. You know, was the market hot? Was the market slow at that time? I mean, because we know what happened now, but what was the flavor during that time?
And of course, when I am talking about this is from my own experience, right, of doing a lot of business in Baltimore City, county area. So other people could have other experiences with it, but I think it's pretty much the same thing for everyone. Right at the beginning, when things started shutting down, I mean, I remember having conversations with colleagues, and we were like, oh my gosh, are we ever going to sell a house again? Because nothing was happening. And I've been in real estate for 17 years, a pretty high volume the entire time. I think during that March, April time period when things first shut down because of the pandemic, I had like a 2-3 week period where my phone did not ring at all. I would wake up and go throughout the day and have like 2 or 3 emails, like nothing. I wasn't showing houses. We weren't putting houses on the market. Nothing was going on in that initial, I'd say 1.5 to 2 months. It was very, very slow. It was almost like a shock reaction, you know? Nobody knew what to do. We were told not to leave our houses. So what were we going to do? Sell them? We were supposed to stay in them, right? So that initial month or two was just unbelievably slow in the real estate market. And there were, as realtors, we all talk amongst each other on social media pages that we have that are private, or telephone conversations, or, Zoom calls, things like that. And everybody was kind of wondering, when would we get to the point where people would start wanting to put their homes on the market again, or buyers, being interested in shopping for homes again, because it was so painfully slow.
Well, I remember, because it's crazy, my washing machine broke down during this time. And it was crazy because I'm like, how do I get somebody in my house? This is kind of odd. We don't know where, it was kind of like the boogeyman. Nobody knew what was this thing out there. And I remember, everybody had the mask on. And for me to think about having somebody come to my house.
Yes.
That's weird. That's weird at that point.
If you think about just selling houses in general, take the pandemic away from it. it's weird. It feels strange. I shouldn't say it's weird. It feels strange to leave your home and have somebody that you don't know access your house and walk through it with people that you don't know. It just in general, selling a house is kind of a strange process for a lot of people. It's a little uncomfortable. And then when you add the pandemic stuff on top of it, and then you have people potentially who might have some virus that you know very little about in your houses, that's why most people just said, forget it. I don't want people in the house at all. And so much changed during that time as we started to come out of that, as home buyers started to look for homes again, and home sellers started to put their homes on the market again. There were so many changes to how we schedule appointments, how we show houses, what we require from people in order to go see houses. There were a lot of changes that came into place, I think, that started to make people maybe feel a little more comfortable about going back into the process.
So did you guys have to go out and hire professional videographers? And did you have to change the whole game up, like the virtual, you go in yourself and virtually tour the house for your clients when it first started? Or were people just like, you know what, I'm going to stay put and see what happens?
When it first started, in my experience, people just stayed put and did nothing. Part of the reason now, everyone feels differently about things such as 3D tours and video versus, for example, flat photography. Some people love it, some people don't like it. I have my personal opinion about video. I like somebody to come into a house because a home buying process is an emotional experience. I can look at the pictures online and think it looks great. I can even look at a video or do a 3D tour and think, oh, that looks cool. But it's not the same thing as walking into the property and feeling what it feels like to walk into the property. And that's typically what people buy homes off of, right? So that move to video, in my experience with my sellers and my buyers who wanted video taken, was more about trying to minimize people coming into the house that don't need to be there. So for example, if you just, somebody looks at the pictures online and says, I want to go see property 123 Main Street, and they make an appointment and they see it, they might come in and say, oh no, the bedrooms were too small, it'll never work for us, or I want a bigger kitchen. If you post video or a 3D tour where you can literally walk through the property from your computer, some of those things you can weed out properties that you might not necessarily need to go into. So I started doing that for my sellers as a way to make sure that the people that were entering the homes were people who had already seen as much information as you could possibly see online, and they still wanted to see the house.
So were there certain restrictions going to these houses? Was it one person every 3 hours? Was it 1 or 2 people per day? Just because you didn't know about the ailment in the air, you didn't know what was going on. And how were the home sellers responding to? Did they have rules for people coming in their house? How did that work? How did you? 'Cause that's a lot of coordination now.
Yeah, and it was. Just with COVID in general, there were all different rules state by state, even sometimes, county by county about how things should be handled. So as realtors, there was a lot of confusion because we would see things come out, sometimes from the governor. Sometimes it was unclear who it came from, if it was from a realtor association, about how many people were allowed in a house at one given time and what we were allowed to ask for in order to allow people into the house. So most of it, I think, was seller driven. But what was pretty typical was no more than 3 adults in the house at one time, and that includes the agent. If there were children, they had to stay outside of the home. Because of touching. And if there were children, for example, I had appointments with buyers of mine, and it was a couple and they had 2 children. So it was impossible for myself and the husband and the wife to enter the home and leave the kids outside by themselves. So I would go in with the husband and we would see the house. And then we would talk about his feelings about the house, and then he would leave and watch the kids while the wife came in to see the house, because it was a limit of 3 people in the house at the same time. with no overlapping appointments. So when we schedule appointments, you can have typically, without the pandemic, you can have multiple people in the house at the same time. If you want to have back-to-back-to-back agents, you're allowed to do that if the sellers want you to. But typically we would set the regulation that there was no overlapping appointments either. Now, one thing that did also, if you think about competition, is if you can only get 3 people in the house at one time and you have no overlapping appointments and you have a lot of people that want to see it, what it created was this sense of demand, even if there really maybe wasn't one, because I was in real estate in 2004, 5, 6 when the market was really hot then too. It's the only time since then where I've showed up to a house and literally had to wait in a line of people outside because of the mandate that, not mandate necessarily, but the rule that there were 3 people in the house at one time and that was it. So it created this line outside of the house of people waiting, which of course then created this need of, oh my gosh, there's so many people waiting to see the house.
We'll get into that. We'll get into that in the second half because that's where it gets crazy. So I guess open houses, that's done.
Well, they've started back again.
Okay.
And my comments on open houses don't just have to do with the pandemic.
Right.
Is an open house worthwhile to a seller to do? For many reasons people think they are, and for many reasons people think they aren't. I mean, if you talk about, with an open house, you say the door is open. And there's no stopping somebody from coming in.
Right.
We don't take copies of driver's license. We have people sign in, but I mean, really, who knows who's signing in, right? And people are walking through the house that they could be potential buyers, but they also could not. They could also just be somebody who wanders off the street, So open houses themselves are kind of an interesting animal. But then with the pandemic, when you can't have multiple people in the house at the same time, it was almost pointless to have a 2-hour open house because you'd have to rush people. I did go to an open house with clients once, and it was I think they had a 2-hour open house, and the worst part of it was in the rain.
Oh, no.
And they had a minimum of the number of people that come in, and it was in a very hot neighborhood in Baltimore County, and I'm not exaggerating. We waited in line for 45 minutes just to get into the open house, not only because a lot of people were there, but also because they had to allow people to walk through and nobody else could enter. So it just became pointless. So people got rid of them. Nobody was doing open houses during the really tight shutdown time.
Folks, we'll be right back after these messages. We're going to talk about the interest rates, how they dropped, how it was the buyer's market and seller's market. And we'll get into a little bit more depth because we're going to get into the meat of things now. So we'll be right back, folks. And folks, we are back. I told you with one of the best real estate agents in the state of Maryland, the DMV, all that good stuff. I mean, she really crushes it out here, and she's been I'm very appreciative that she's taking time out of her day to come and chat with the old friend, because I think this is a very important topic about what happened, because I don't think a lot of people knew really what happened. They saw, they heard the stories. She was actually out there in the front lines. So let's talk about the craziness, Stephanie. Let's talk about the craziness. Interest rates started going down, right?
Yeah.
Like how bad? Like
way down.
Like to give us a little, like, from where to where, from the beginning of the pandemic to where it was when it went low. Like what? Like how big of a rate did it drop?
Well, I mean, we were well below 3 for the majority. Once things started picking up again, the interest rates, we were above 3 before, maybe in the mid to high 3s or so, and then they dropped below 3, which, if you think about it, that's like free money for the most part, right? If you talk to people who bought homes back in the 80s, they'll say their interest rate was 21%. I thought when I had refinanced one of my houses years ago, when I got 6.25%, I was like really excited about that. To have an interest rate below 3%, it's almost like you're not paying interest for the money. So that an interest rate drop like that always sparks people's interest in purchasing, because the lower that the rate is, the more buying power you have, right? So if you could have bought a house that was $250,000 when the rate was 3.5, and now the rate's 2 3/4, you can buy more of a house. So people start to get excited about that. And first-time home buyers jump into the market. That's a big first-time home buyer when interest rates drop. So when that, I would say that really started dropping this summer. After, at the same time, there were many things that happened at the same time that created the dynamic of what happened in the market over the last year and a half. And one of them was the interest rates dropping. Because at the time, we would constantly be saying the only thing that seems to really be surging and doing well right now, for the most part, unless you're in some sort of video streaming type of thing, is the real estate market. Because you figure in the pandemic, so many businesses just lost everything they had under them and closed or struggled. And the real estate market was one of the things that just persisted and grew, although there wasn't as much inventory to sell, it just was one of the things that was hot.
I remember I had friends who lived in Canton, and they fixed their house up a little bit, and they moved to Rogers Ford just for a rental. And it was only supposed to be for a year. So it was like a year right before the pandemic started. And they were like, oh, we'll be on here for a year. They just finally closed on a house a month ago.
Yeah.
So summer of 2020, because I feel like I've lost years. I don't even know what year it is.
Yeah, it went into a black hole somewhere.
It really did. And this is when the interest rates started going down.
Yeah.
People from, now, because I want you to walk us through this. Where are all these people coming from who want to buy houses now? Are they people from the city who want to move to the burbs? Are there people who live in apartments who want to get a house and get out of apartment complexes because they're stuck inside? Like, what are other people, like, who are you dealing with? Like, who are you dealing with this? Who are your customers or clients at this point?
So there's some clients that aren't typically there. For example, in 2020 and even going into 21, I have more clients than I've ever had that are picking up and moving out of state. And a lot of them are doing it because they can work from home now. So that was something that was a little new to what's typical in the market. If you're working from home anyway and you lived in Baltimore, it doesn't really matter I have clients that picked up and moved to California. And just because they always wanted to live there, and now they were able to do that without having to worry about changing jobs because they were working from home. So that was a different group of people that was greater than it typically is that came into the market. I have this past year and a half, I've had more people selling and relocating out of state than I typically have. A lot of people moving from the city into the counties. A lot. So because I work a lot in this northeast side of the city area, a lot of my sellers, like the majority of my sellers, are leaving this area and going into northern Baltimore County or Harford County and moving out into the counties. A lot of them are looking for bigger houses that have office space. At the time, right, still when everything was shut down, they were looking for schooling space, because their kids were homeschooling and they were sitting they had 3 kids at the dining room table. So, what they're looking for was different, feeling sick of being in the same house for a year, and they'd been thinking about maybe moving at some point, and then they were like, oh, we got to get out of here. People who are moving from the city into the county because they don't have a ton of backyard space, and they wanted somewhere where their kids could actually go out and play because they were staying at home more than they typically had been staying at home. And there was something else that you had mentioned in terms of groups. Oh, rentals.
Rentals, yeah.
So, yes, I don't see it. I see the rental turning into a home purchase more now. I did not have that experience personally during the pandemic because you have to think about the economic impact that the pandemic had on a large majority of people, right? So a lot of people who were renting for a reason. They were renting because maybe prior to the pandemic, they hadn't quite gotten into a position where they were ready or wanting to purchase. And then unfortunately, the pandemic affected so many businesses. People's hours were cut, some businesses closed. So unfortunately, a lot of people who might have been getting themselves prior to the pandemic trying to get themselves out of rentals to purchase were negatively impacted by the pandemic. And so my personal experience was not people moving from a rental into a home that they own.
Wow. Because I remember on my neighborhood, I remember my neighbor across the street, shout out to Mr. Edwin, he was always looking to get his house back because he bought back when you said 04, 03, and his house was upside down because he bought it for a pretty high price.
Yeah.
And he was like, Aaron, I think I'm going to pull the trigger. I'm like, really? He was like, houses are selling like hotcakes. And what happened was, well, there was a house around the corner from me that sold for an astronomical figure.
Right.
And I was like, damn, I might want to move.
That actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I would say last year and a half, more than ever, my client sellers have been people that had investment properties and they were renting them, and they look at the prices and they would say, I'm going to sell it because I never, ever would have expected that I could get that much money for my house right now. I actually sold a house over on Echodale. And when the guy called me, he had been renting it. And when the guy called me to sell it, we were talking about pricing. And I told him what I thought I would most likely list it for. We were on the phone, but he almost fell on the floor. I mean, he wasn't expecting that he would ever get those kinds of prices for the house. So I've had a ton of sellers that were investors, like you said, that just said, I'm going to sell the house now because either I haven't been able to get out of it prior, or the pricing is so high right now that I'm just going to ride that wave.
Well, I will say that I remember I had a friend who lives in New York City. She has a property in Seattle, Washington. She bought this property for $300,000 so many years ago, and they were and their real estate agent was like, "You'll never get this back.
Right?
You'll never get this back." And I remember her giving me a call and saying, "Aaron, I just got my money back for this property, and I never thought I would." I just remember my neighborhood. My neighbor's house was on the market for 3 days, not even 3 days, 2 days. First person saw it, gone. And then 2 houses down, gone.
Yeah.
Then another house around the corner. So my neighbor behind me, he lived in Barcelona, and he was like, the people who were living there were like, we're moving back to home, be closer to family, because the pandemic, again, like you said, people are going back out of state. They're going. They don't want to be. Family thing came in perspective a lot during the pandemic, and the guy I saw him. He's like, I'm selling this. He's like, are you kidding me? The market. So I guess, did you really? I mean, you were telling me some wild stories, but give us a little sample size of like some of the stories. You told me about Silver Spring.
Yeah.
That was like just ludicrous, because I heard that people weren't even looking at. They were just looking around like, I want it. Not like, and like I knew my friends who were getting outbidded by $200,000.
Yeah.
No, and like I mean, I guess walk us through the part of like from the seller's standpoint and like in like the homeowner standpoint, just how, because I remember you said something really specific when we spoke. You were like, normally like I like what I do and I enjoy it, but it felt weird in a way that you're like, I'm making money, but I'm not making honest money right now.
Yeah, because well, for me and everybody, for me, I love my job selling real estate because it's such an intimate relationship with people and a super important part of their lives. I mean, unless you're working with an investor where it's, a little different. But for the most part, I work with home sellers that are selling the homes that they live in and home buyers that are buying a home they want to live in. And that process, and part of what I love about that process is educating people and walking them through it, because I want them to have the most positive experience going through it that they can. And what the demand and the inventory, the low inventory issue created was this very spastic need to handle the purchase in a way that didn't feel right. And not just to me, there's a lot of agents. We would also talk about that, how it doesn't feel right. Like, you want somebody to buy a house, and we always talked about when we first got into real estate, we would say, it's got to be a win-win, right? It's got to feel good to the seller that they're selling the house. It should feel good to the buyer that they're buying the house. We don't want anyone to walk away from it feeling like they got the bad end of the stick. And so when there were things that people were doing in order, so you have to think about it as a seller. You want to sell your house. I probably have said 5,000 times this year to my sellers that I meet with, selling your house, that's not my problem. I can sell your house. The issue is where you're going to go, right? So selling the house, we know if it's priced relatively correctly and it shows well for what the pricing is, the house is going to sell. It might sell in 6 hours in this market, right? That's not the problem. The problem is when the house sells in 6 hours, what are you going to do with yourself and your kids and your dog? Because the issue is finding that next place. Now, I had a lot of clients that said, we're just going to sell the house, we're going to bank the money, and we're going to rent. And honestly, I usually would say then, doing that, it depends on how risk averse you are. If you're somebody that says, all right, I'm just gonna go with it, I'm gonna do that, I don't mind if I can't find something, I'm gonna rent, I don't mind if we live there for a year, I don't mind if it's hard finding a rental, then that's good to do. But for some people, that just doesn't feel good to do that. But that's the way that people in this market may be made out on both ends. You sold the house for higher than you ever expected the house would sell anytime soon. You rent. You rent for as long as you rent for, until you feel like the housing market becomes a little more agreeable, and then you get back in and maybe you don't buy in such a competitive scenario. The one if to that is if interest rates go back up, right? Because then your buying power changes, but that's getting like way into it. But so a lot of people did that. But the issue became, we don't want to rent. We want to find a house. So we put the house on the market and we sell it in 6 hours. Where are you going to go? So those home sellers that are now home buyers are in a position where they have to find something. They have to find something where they want to go, and even under terms that I might say, I would never do that. And so most of those crazy scenarios that came out of people's need to find a property. So they became so incredibly aggressive to their max ability to be aggressive in order to try to secure that house from, over the 10 other offers that were doing the same thing. So things like saying, I'm not going to do any home inspections, none. I don't care if the house appraises for less than I'm buying it for. I'll pay the difference cash out of pocket. Right? So in that scenario, you're buying a house at $400,000, the appraisal comes in at $370,000. You're saying, that's fine, I'll give you the $30,000.
Now, you said something about Silver Spring. That blew my mind. This number was
so that is something. So what happened in Silver Spring, and I had it happen a lot, and I had it happen on several houses around here as well, is one strategy was just come right out of the gates with such a high offer that is so clearly going to beat other offers that the seller just takes it right away before any other offers come in. So on the Silver Spring house that I put on the market, we had talked, it was a renovation of an amazing historic property in a very hot neighborhood in Tacoma Park. And we had talked around pricing around $850, and then the market started getting a little high, and then we had said, let's try $950 because some others had sold in the area around then, and we put it on the market. And within a day, the first offer came in, and honestly, I almost threw up when I opened it. I could not believe the offer. We had the house on the market. It was the first day on the market. It was listed for $950,000. The first offer came in. It was $1,225,000. Before the agent even sent me the offer, she asked me, do you have any other offers in hand? And I told her no. So she knew she wasn't competing. There was no other offer on the table. And they came in $275,000 above the list price. No home inspection, no appraisal contingency. So it didn't matter what the house appraised for. They were buying it for that.
Wow. And what did it appraise for, if you don't mind me asking?
There was no appraisal. Oh, actually, that's not true. I answered that too quickly. I don't know.
Okay.
Because as a seller's agent, we only get the appraisal if it appraises low.
Okay.
A buyer and the buyer's agent get the appraisal on the house. So if you're a buyer and you're buying a house, you know if that house appraised for the value you're in contract for, or if it appraised for over. You get to know that. The seller's agent, we don't get the appraisal. We just know, did it appraise for what we need, at least, or under if it's a problem, right? So on that house, it made no difference what the appraisal was, because there was an appraisal waiver. They already said, regardless of what the appraisal was, that the house was going to sell to us. We never got the appraisal.
Wow, folks. I mean, this is why I brought her on, because I just wanted people to get it like a peek behind the curtain of what was going on out there. Because I've heard so many stories. I had a friend who, they moved out of D.C. They were like, we want to get out.
Yeah.
We need land. We need a backyard. We need just freedom. And they had put away about $700,000, and the house came off first at like $3,000, and then they ended up paying like almost $5,000 because they wanted the house that bad.
Yeah.
And because the people were competing on
right.
prices, like, and the market was just that chaotic.
Right, and that's what feels bad to me when you're working as a buyer. I mean, it feels bad to my buyers, right? So I'm an empath. And so it feels bad to my buyers, so it feels bad to me. It feels bad when somebody, because when you see, like we were talking about walking into houses, it's an emotional experience. When you walk into a house and the buyer's like, oh my gosh, we love this house. This is the house. We want to write a contract. And instead of really in a very strategic way talking about what the value of the house is and how to craft an offer, it became more, how aggressive are you willing to get in order to get this house? Because here's what some other people are doing. I had one situation, and it was a buyer that really just wanted the house, and they'd lost other houses before. And so part of this problem with the appraisal is if the appraisal comes in low. So I did have a client actually where when we crafted the offer, they agreed that they would pay all of the seller's closing related costs, including all of the commissions, which are typically paid by a seller. So they covered, and it was like $20,000 of the seller's costs in order to win the bid. So their price could be the same, but the benefit to the seller was still higher, right? So it's a less likely chance, that gets very intricate, but of an appraisal issue. But I heard people offering all kinds of things, offering services of businesses that they do to the seller, saying they would pay for moving expenses, moving trucks. I mean, as many bizarre offerings as you could do to try to get to win over another offer, not just on pricing, which obviously is one of the issues, is pricing, but also very creative ways to try to get sellers to accept their offer over others.
Wow. Now, how's the housing market now? Like, where are we at right now? Has it slowed down a little bit? Are people still like looking, or is it kind of like we're taking our breath and trying to figure things out and go from like?
A lot of people are talking about a market slowdown right now, but I don't think that we can really look at that as anything having to do with the pandemic, because if you historically look at the way the market changes seasonally, there's always a slowdown in like mid-August to like late September. It always slows. People take vacations, kids are going back to school, we have Labor Day holiday, so that is a normal slow of the market. And that's what we've been in for like the last month. So everybody's like, the market's slowing. And it's like, well, but is it really slowing? Because it always slows like this typically. Is it really pandemic? So we do have a couple things going on that might slow it down a little bit. Interest rates are starting to go up a little bit. I mean, they're still ridiculously low. As we head into winter, less inventory comes on. We have the variants from COVID, so some people are concerned about that again. But I think the slowdown of the market is actually more based on location. Like I put actually that's not true. I put 2 houses on the market last week. One went under contract with multiple bids in 24 hours. So same thing. I have a buyer I just got into contract this morning. We lost a multiple bid situation last week. This was potentially another multiple bid situation. Thank goodness the seller took the offer, but it still was this, very frenzied. So I think a little bit has to do with where inventory is greater, because some neighborhoods, like in this northeast area right now, there's more inventory on the market than there was maybe 6 months ago. So the more inventory on the market, then that will create a bit of a slowdown. But when I'm talking about a slowdown, I'm talking about the difference between one day on the market and I have 5 offers in my hand, as opposed to maybe it takes a week to get an offer, which still is ridiculously fast. So the neighborhoods that still have very low inventory and very high demand are still seeing this very frenzied pace. And I think that, so you can't really generalize about the market because I think it's so neighborhood specific.
Have you seen an uptick in Northeast Baltimore as far as people moving in, moving out? I mean, what have you seen just with your personals, like with your clients and people who want to move to the area and whatnot?
I mean, honestly, this neighborhood has, ever since I've been in real estate, has always been in high demand. Always. I mean, it's always been desirable. People always, especially first-time home buyers or people looking for this kind of neighborhood feel in the city. It's always been a high-demand neighborhood. Throughout the last year and a half, it seems like there's an uptick in interest, and that there may be the amount of homes that are selling is not significantly greater, but the demand and the speed and the price at which they're selling. I mean, prices in this area are some of the prices I've seen in this area. I never thought that the homes would sell for that pricing, because if you look at it, you consider we're in the city right now and the taxes are double what they are in the county. That's a fact, right? So when you see housing prices here where you could buy a house also in the county for that same price, right? That hasn't typically happened. Usually, because we have the county line only 1.5 miles up the street, right? So usually when people are looking in the city, the prices in this area are a little bit lower than the county because the taxes are also higher too. And then the county might have a higher price range, but the taxes are lower. But now recently I've seen so many houses where it's like, wow, that house sold for $400,000. That's really crazy, because you think, well, you could cross over the county line too and get a house for $400,000. So, but just in terms about desirability in this neighborhood, it's still one of, in my opinion, because I'm very biased to it, it's like one of the only neighborhoods in the city where you get, it could be a small house, like a little bungalow or something, but you could also get a very large 4-square with some of the larger homes and some land. And you're so convenient to the major routes in downtown Baltimore and the universities and food and things like that. And the price is great. I mean, it really is affordable for people newly moving into the area or first-time home buyers coming in. The price is so affordable, and it's really one of the only, there are a few other little neighborhoods around the city, but it's like always in demand, and I'm sure it's because of that reason, because what you get for your money.
Nice. Again, folks, I'm glad she was dropped some jewels, some gems. You know, she always come with the heat, and I'm just so excited that you came on the show and just really just to walk us through this whole process, because, you know, a lot of us didn't really know what was going on. All we know was all on TV, what your friends were talking about, and things that people who were looking to buy and purchase houses. And that was actually a new thing that you said that I learned today, that you want to sell your house, but where are you going?
Yes, that's the biggest problem.
And that by itself, now it got me thinking like, wow, that's interesting.
Right.
Where are you moving after that? Because it's selling that quickly. Wow. Are there any final things you'd like to say? Just where can they find you if they want to sell their house or they want to look into buy a house? We can promote where you're going to be. Where can we find you?
Yeah, so I'm on Facebook. I basically live my life there. You can reach me at Stephanie Bamberger Realtor and MBA on Facebook. Most people find me that way, or Stephanie Bamberger, my non-real estate page on Facebook. My phone number is 410-916-1357. Super easy to get that way. Probably those are the easiest ways to get me.
All right. Anything last to say to anybody who's looking to purchase a house right now?
It's an exciting time. It is slowing down a little bit. So just, in certain areas, I wouldn't feel scared of it because in the end, buying a house, you get so much more than renting. And the rental rates are so high right now that a lot of people who are renting can purchase a house for way less, plus you get the tax benefit. So it seems super intimidating because of what's put out there on the media, but honestly, if you're working with a real estate agent that is familiar with what is going on, and not just myself, there's a lot of us, you can navigate through that process. And in the end, buying real estate is always a good investment. In the end, regardless of it going up or down or whatever, it always comes up, and it's always a smart move.
Folks, you heard it here first. Again, thank you for coming on October Surprise Part 2. I'm always dropping jewels and gems and trying to educate our listeners out there. And, you could be in California, you could be anywhere in the world, but this really pertains to you for the real estate game. This is happening all over the U.S. And I just wanted to make sure everybody was informed. If you have any more questions, please follow her on Facebook. You heard her phone number here. Folks, love, peace, and happiness. We're out.